Warren Buffett is a very smart person, but he might have been getting this one wrong. Warren Buffett loaded up on ticker symbol ATVI, Activision Blizzard. He is a big fan of Bill Gates and Microsoft, and, you know, he doesn't really buy tech stocks, but he likes Microsoft. He likes Bill Gates. Bill Gates, in his portfolio, has a lot of Berkshire Hathaway. And so he thinks Satya Nadella, who's the CEO of Microsoft, is a pretty strong, smart guy. As a result of him being a pretty strong and smart guy, the acquisitions that he makes, which have frankly turned the company around since 2016, for example, the acquisition of LinkedIn for $22 billion, which is now printing $8 billion a year and has 975 million members. It is a really good product, good acquisition, has turned the company around. Microsoft has been a rocket ship since 2016. Microsoft decided that they're going to compete in the VR, AR gaming space. They obviously own Xbox. They have massive distribution in video games. And what if they could buy Activision Blizzard, one of the largest video game companies in the world, one of the best video game creators in the world, with some of the video games that they've created reaching hundreds of millions of users? Well, the FTC has a different story in mind, but Warren Buffett decided to take the gamble. He said, look, if Microsoft buys them, and they were sitting at a stock price for around 55, 60 bucks when he started buying in, this is an acquisition for around 70, 80 bucks. There's a nice little 10% upside. You put in hundreds of millions of dollars. You make that much money for free because the deal goes through. It is a bet on the arbitrage of, will this deal go through? Will Microsoft be able to buy and pay the premium they've decided to pay? Which means, you know, if you bought in at the bottom, which is the price that people think it's going to be before it hits the premium, the price before really the premium happens, because the market thinks the acquisition is not going to happen. This is what we saw with Twitter before it got to 54.20. It was sitting at around $45, $46. There's a nice little 10% you can make. And when you're Warren Buffett and you're playing with hundreds of millions of dollars, you can make a decent amount of money. Let's get into why Microsoft has the upper hand against the FTC, because now the FTC is suing them. So it's really competition between if the FTC will let this deal go through or if Microsoft ultimately is able to buy Activision Blizzard, and if Warren Buffett gets his payday.
The Federal Trade Commission suing to block Microsoft's acquisition of Activision Blizzard, but Microsoft is not expected to go away quietly. Joining us right now is Aaron Glick, Cowen Deals analyst. And Aaron, this is one that it looks like they are girding for a fight. They're not going to step away. What happens?
It's a great question. You know, the prevailing wisdom amongst investors and arbitrage investors is that Microsoft has the upper hand with in a legal battle against the FTC because of the 10-year licensing agreement that they've offered to Nintendo, Switch, and PlayStation. But what's important here, and I just read through the complaint this morning, what's important to note is that this is not just about the FTC. I mean, this is also about the UK CMA, that's their antitrust authority, and the European Commission, that's the European Union's antitrust authority. Because those two jurisdictions, if they bring a lawsuit to block this deal, it's much more difficult for Microsoft to challenge them in those jurisdictions and overcome that lawsuit. And so I'd like to just highlight one thing in the complaint and this was in the complaint, it was also the second paragraph of the FTC's press release announcing the lawsuit. They highlighted that when Microsoft acquired Bethesda Games in early 2021, they made representations to the European Commission that they would have no incentive to foreclose those games from rival consoles, meaning that economically it was in their best interest to continue to offer those games to people like PlayStation. That was early 2021, and already they've decided to make those games exclusive to Microsoft, to Xbox.
That right there is the big thing to talk about, which is why I believe the FTC is suing in the first place. The idea that Microsoft said, hey, these games that we acquired, they're going to be able to go to PlayStation. They're going to be able to go out to Nintendo, even though I don't even know if Nintendo is really competing on the level of PlayStation and Xbox. But nonetheless, they're going to license these games to other carriers, and it's not going to be exclusive to Xbox, which means essentially for a consumer, you don't have to buy an Xbox just to be able to play those games. You can play those games even if Microsoft's parent company or a company they acquired created those games. Yeah, because you have a PlayStation, right? You can still access those video games. When Microsoft said, actually, we're going to make that exclusive, that completely violated the trust that the FTC had within Microsoft to be able to make acquisitions that keep the market competitively friendly. And in the video game space, you really do need to keep the market competitively friendly. I mean, there's EA, there's SE, there's Microsoft, there's PlayStation and Sony, but there's not like a lot of players. And if there's not a ton of play, and I know there's Unity and Meta with their VR, AR gaming and stuff, but like at the end of the day, it's really Microsoft and Sony. And so if Microsoft has some of the best games that they acquire, if they pay $70 billion for Activision, and those games aren't included on the PlayStation, one could argue that gives Microsoft a very unfair monopoly because they already own Xbox, to make it a little bit harder for other video game companies to compete, especially video game startup companies to compete. So overall, you could see why there's some distrust there and what Warren Buffett might not have factored in, because when the FTC is likely to sue you, it's hard to get through that, but let's see if there's still a shot there.
And so I think that tarnishes the trust that the EC has. And when the EC unconditionally cleared Microsoft's acquisition of Bethesda, they highlighted that Microsoft made representations that they wouldn't have any incentive economically to withhold games. And so that was right front and center in the FTC complaint.
Is that something that the European Union has kind of weighed in on? It's one thing for the FTC to be pointing this out. It's another thing if European regulators say, yeah, you lied to us.
That's exactly what I'm trying to get at here. So the UK and the EC, their reviews are still pending. We're going to see, we expect to see a statement of objections from the UK sometime in January. We might see one from the European Commission a little later. Those reviews are set to expire at the end of the first quarter, right? So the FTC and Lina Khan, they've taken the lead here, and they're signaling to these other regulators, look, here are some potential issues. And we don't know. We know that they all communicate with each other. We don't know that if they're all on the same page or not. But that's a risk factor that investors are going to be talking about.
Your best guess as to the EU? Because I thought you were in a position where you thought EU regulators were more likely to approve this.
I think the consensus view amongst arbitrage investors is that the 10-year licensing agreement will carry the day and help them secure approval in the UK and in the EC. Look, I think we run a little bit of risk of being in groupthink right now, in what people call the ARB echo chamber. We're all talking to the same consultants. We're all looking at the same precedents, and so everyone has the same thesis. I think there could be more risk here than the market's crediting. Now, with that said, let's remember that the market's only pricing about a 30-35% probability of this deal closing. So I think the pushback to what I'm saying, and I'm sure I'm going to hear it from a lot of clients, I think the pushback is we're being compensated for that risk, right? I think most investors would say there's at least a 50-50 chance that they prevail in these jurisdictions. I personally might be a little lower. It's very difficult to say. But
All right. So ultimately, that's going to be the deciding factor when it comes to Microsoft and Warren Buffett. Now, again, them not licensing the games through the EC and the European Commission and how they ultimately felt about being lied to when Microsoft first acquired a company that said they weren't going to make the games exclusive and then made the games exclusive makes it a little bit more skeptical for institutions like the FTC to think that Microsoft has their best intentions at heart. And look, at the end of the day, if you're a company, I mean, you want those games to be exclusive. You don't want those games to go to other people. Like, that's the whole point of having your competitive advantage. But that is what creates problems with monopolies. Remember that Microsoft was one of the first companies to have to deal with antitrust regulations back in 2000, and they actually got prosecuted for it, and they had to break up a little bit. So Microsoft is no stranger to antitrust. They've obviously developed an incredible moat around the company with what they've been able to do over the past 10 years, but some of those acquisitions might get challenged if you've been a bad actor in the past. The question is, how does Warren Buffett ultimately deal with this? Now, I don't think Warren Buffett's investment is going to crap, because he was buying so low that even though Activision may not get acquired for the premium price that it's getting, he's still going to be up at least $5-6 on his investment from his initial premium price point. The question is if Warren Buffett sells out of this. So it's going to be really interesting to see the next 13F and 13G filings, which are the filings that come out every 45 days from institutional investors, to see if Berkshire Hathaway has sold out of their ATVI position and if they are going to keep it or not. Now, remember, they don't invest in tech. Berkshire, like the only tech company that Warren Buffett has invested in has been Apple, because like he thought of Apple as like a consumer company more than a tech company. So they don't invest in video game technology. They invest in ketchup, right? Like they invest in soda. They invest in staple goods. That's the stuff they care about. And honestly, Microsoft's portfolio, or Bill Gates's portfolio, if you look up his portfolio, it's relatively the same thing. It's a lot of Berkshire Hathaway, Waste Management, Caterpillar, like all of these types of hard, durable companies. Not as much tech, which is interesting because Microsoft, Bill Gates is like a tech guy, but like he doesn't trust in the tech industry as much. So Warren Buffett is not a guy to bet on video game companies. He's a guy to bet on hard hard things. This was a pure arbitrage play, and now it's a question to see if this arbitrage goes through. If it doesn't go through, he doesn't make as much money as he thought. If it does go through, then he does. And the question is, whenever you're thinking of an arbitrage play, same thing with Twitter at 54.20, if you were buying at 45, will the deal go through? Do you and Twitter was one judge's opinion away from not going through, and Elon would not have bought the company. He did not want to spend $44 billion. Now it looks like he wanted to spend $44 billion, but he admitted he did not want to spend that much money. So a lot of these things when it comes to arbitrage plays are purely subjective. You literally never know what's going to happen, which is why I stay away from them, because I don't have the type of money to just risk to be like, oh, there's an arbitrage, let me go try to get it. It's like, no, that's very risky. You don't know if it's going to happen. You've got to have a gut feeling. Sometimes your gut may be wrong. Sometimes it might be right, but you just got to see how the external factors play out to justify if the acquisition could happen. So those are my thoughts. How do you feel about Warren Buffett potentially missing out on a major acquisition play? And do you think it is good for Microsoft to purchase Activision Blizzard and what that does for the gaming industry? Thank you so much for listening and watching. We'll see you guys in the next one.